Welcome to the Commentary Magazine Daily Podcast. Today is Wednesday, December 4th, 2024. I'm John Podhoretz, the subdued voice editor of Commentary Magazine, coming back to you after 2 days of being pretty much unable to speak, thanks to the ministrations of my doctors and various wonder workers. I seem to have restored the ability to say things without coughing and finding it impossible to breathe. So I'm back with you and with my colleagues, executive editor Abe Greenwald. Hi, Abe.
Welcome back, John. Hi.
Thank you. Media commentary columnist Christine Rosen. Hi, Christine.
Hi, John.
Washington commentary columnist Matthew Continetti. Hi, Matt.
Hi, John.
And senior editor Seth Mandel. Hi, Seth.
Hi, John.
So I've been noting over the last week or week and a half that very old friends of mine, old colleagues of mine, people that I used to gain succor and wisdom from on almost everything they said, are all sounding like screaming, hysterical, lunatic madmen. And I say this advisedly because what I read from them is we are now facing a constitutional crisis every day for the next 4 years. And aside from the fact that they are saying this while a president of the United States just offered a blanket pardon to his son that we, I think, all read as a blanket pardon to himself, because some of it involves actions going back to when he, Joe Biden, was vice president and his son began obtaining filthy lucre as a result of his father's job. And as I think Matt keeps talking about, we got to see what's going to happen with his brother Jim, Biden's brother Jim, who was also a participant in this matter. So that's kind of a constitutional crisis, but okay, let's leave that to one side. Here's what struck me in the news in the last 24 hours. So South Korea, one of our leading allies on the planet Earth, most important allies on the planet Earth, a hedge against China, a representative of the world of commerce among like-minded democratic states, has a president, got not elected in 2022, didn't have really much of a parliamentary majority, couldn't get stuff through the parliament. So he announces martial law. Martial law is something in the South Korean tradition, was declared 4 or 5 times in the 1970s and 1980s. When South Korea was under military rule, not when it was under democratic rule, under military rule. I think the last time you can go back to martial law being declared in something that was nominally considered a democracy was Indira Gandhi in India in 1974 and 1975. India wasn't really much of a democracy, but it had democratic institutions. This is not a normal thing to happen. And in fact, the people of South Korea said, "What? Martial law? What are you talking about?" He said, "No, martial law, no free press. If you oppose me, I'm going to get you arrested. Cops are in the streets. Parliament is suspended." And basically the entire country said, nah, sorry. He suspended martial law 6 hours later. Parliament has now moved to impeach him, and he apparently will be impeached by Friday. Now that's a constitutional crisis. That's what is an actual that's what you call a constitutional crisis. A democratically elected leader decides to impose authoritarianism on his country by fiat. That's a constitutional crisis. Let's now go to France. France, second largest economy in Europe. Macron, the president, called a snap election in the summer very foolishly, ended up with no working majority in any capacity, took 3 months to find a prime minister. Prime minister just struck a budget deal. The budget deal pleased no one. And supposedly sometime today, that government will fall. And Macron can't call another election for a year. So the country of France, which has a weird structure where you have a president, that's Macron, but he actually doesn't run domestic policy. That's the prime minister. Kind of a constitutional crisis, wouldn't you say? Kind of constitutionally crisisy. what do we have? We have an incoming president nominating a bunch of cabinet officials. Some of them are going to go through. Some of them are dropping like flies. The DA nominee dropped himself yesterday. We don't even know why. We don't even know why he was picked in the first place. He's like from a county in Florida, so we can assume that Susie Wiles, the incoming chief of staff, had something to do with it. But seemed like a weird choice. And he said in his statement, I'm kind of a weird choice. So I think I'm just going to go back to my old job now. Pete Hegseth is not looking good. And Matt Gaetz obviously didn't look good. So by the time Trump gets to his administration beginning, he will have made some foolish appointments that will have been cashiered. And note my use of the phrase cash in cashiered. We can discuss that in a minute. We are living through the opposite of a constitutional crisis right now.
With the exception of a sitting current president who keeps wandering off stage whenever he goes on a foreign trip, and no one seems to know who's running the country in his absence. It's not the vice president. So there's that. I mean, if you think that's a constitutional crisis, which obviously the Democratic Party hasn't for 4 years, so why start now?
There was a photograph on the day of the pardon of Jill Biden sitting at the Resolute desk, reading papers and like looking like she was signing them.
Well, she's on her farewell tour right now.
Yes.
She just was visiting her ancestral home in Italy, and she's making a couple of other stops in Europe before ending up in Paris for the reopening of Notre Dame,
where she will be joined, of course, by the actual president of the United States, Donald Trump, who is president of the United States now, even though he won't be sworn in for another 5 weeks or 6 weeks.
It's not really a constitutional crisis. It's more like confusion. A little bit confused.
Well,
but people seem happy with it. So
I just think, like, first of all, Jill Biden shouldn't be sitting at the president's desk. She's his wife. She has no constitutional authority. The first lady is not a position that exists.
She had
within the Constitution.
Marine Corps band compose music to greet her, a version of the "Hail to the Chief" for her.
Yeah, it's bad though. I think they deliberately made it bad. Like no one is ever going to play that after January 21st. The
Hail to the Chieftress will be interested in that.
Yeah, Hail to the Chieftress is being retired.
Yeah,
it's like the it's like one of those things when if you turn on American Top 40 on Sirius XM on Sunday morning and they play you the American Top 40 from 1979, and you are unfortunate enough to hit on it right at the beginning, so you're at like numbers 40 to 31, and you hear all the songs that didn't become hits,
right,
but sort of charted for a minute. That's what the Jill Biden Hail to the Chieftress song is. Anyway, what I mean by us having no constitutional crisis is we are moving along just fine, and if those people at the Atlantic and the Bulwark and everything would just like take some meds or keep their powder dry for what will inevitably be controversies, difficulties, confusions, and reasons to oppose Trump in his second term, they would retain credibility that they are losing second by second by second by being, Chicken Little.
Right. I had a friend growing up when we used to play basketball at the park, and my good friend went through a phase where whenever he was called for a foul, he would say, "Oh, you want a foul? I'll give you a foul." He learned that, and every time then he would foul somebody harder. Every time he got called for foul, that was his way of not getting called for foul. That's what people are doing here. I feel like Trump is, Trump. You want to see a Trump foul, you're going to get a Trump foul. I promise you. Don't call foul on whatever he's doing now during the transition. I promise you, when he becomes president, you will see a real foul. You'll get your chance to see a real foul. Maybe don't call it yet.
Can we back up and talk a little bit about these crises overseas? Because I think people are interested, in particular in the South Korea, what happened there. It was a very fast coup. It was a speedy coup. The President Yoon gave this speech late Tuesday night where he said he was declaring martial law because the parliament was intransigent and filled with communist sympathizers. And then by the dawn, basically, he had backtracked and rescinded his order. And I think that's actually a testament to the strength of South Korean democracy. The parliament met after the declaration and unanimously voted against it. And the chairman of Yoon's party also came out against it. And so this actually is, to me, kind of inspiring, because it means here in South Korea, it's almost 40 years after the transition from autocracy to democracy, democracy has taken roots, so that he was not allowed to. He can do this, but it didn't last. I mean, he had to back down, and as you say, he's now going to be impeached. I will say, though, this has put the Biden administration in a difficult position, because President Yoon, from an American's perspective, has actually been pretty solid. He is an opponent of the North. He has worked to improve the bilateral relationship with Japan. And he's in a situation, too, where North Korea is increasingly belligerent and mysterious. So North Korea has changed the terms of the truce with the South, and now classifies the South as an enemy state that ought to be destroyed. It, of course, is deploying troops to Ukraine. It has been sending these garbage umbrellas over the border. There have been weird construction projects going on in the DMZ that has led to some shelling from the south into the north. The peninsula seems like a very dangerous place, more dangerous than usual right now. And to have Yoon take this gamble out of nowhere, and to see it backfire with his possible removal, only makes the situation more unstable.
It's a very important point that South Korea is a young democracy, by which I mean it's less than 4 decades old. I remember watching, I think in 1982, when during a crisis before this, Pat Schroeder, who was a congressman from Colorado, and I don't remember what her position was. She might have been chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee, or I don't remember why she had taken this trip there. And Nightline was with her, and she came off a jetway, and the country of South Korea was so martially hepped up that it manhandled her on the jetway and grabbed her to sort of pat her down. And she said, "What are you doing? Let me go. You let me go." This was it was still an ally of the United States, as we, of course, had 38,000 soldiers in South Korea, and one of its only friends. And the regime so didn't know how to behave, or its military so didn't know how to behave, that it was, not only was it doing this to a duly elected American politician, but to a woman, no less. The learning curve has been very steep, and this is a weird throwback to something. And as you say, I think maybe Yoon has been unnerved to the point of instability by what the North has been doing, and discerns collaboration in the South that he thought,
I think,
it was necessary to make moves on. But
I also think it's probably something of a byproduct of just the international sense of upheaval, political polarization, which is enormous there and everywhere, populist movements, resistance movements, and there have not been crises everywhere over the past few years, but since COVID, we've seen convulsions of one sort or another in all sorts of governments and regimes. In whether it's Israel prior to October 7th or Australia or Canada, there are these strong forces of political polarization and sort of the resort to emergency tactics. I think that's a piece of this here.
Well, that's
To which we might add America's absence also from in some ways. I think, it's hard to prove a negative, but I think we can't ignore the anxiety that builds overseas. Matt mentioned how difficult the South Korea's neighborhood is becoming. We can talk about China also sort of ramping up its provocations in the area. And I think that we can't underestimate the anxiety that pervades when America appears to be either momentarily headless or asleep or distracted or something like that too. People feel like they need to take action themselves.
What Abe is saying about polarization is absolutely the case in France, the other story that's dominating the international headlines. The situation there is very interesting. Earlier this year, of course, national populist parties did very well in European parliamentary elections. That scared French President Emmanuel Macron into calling a snap election, thinking that a snap parliamentary election would strengthen his position. That backfired. And in fact, in the French parliamentary elections, you had this very unusual result where the two extremes did rather well, and Macron's party, its latest name, I forget, but was weakened. And so this created a deadlock situation where you had the parliament basically dominated by the France Unbowed, which is the ultra-left coalition, as well as Marine Le Pen's party, the National Populists. And Macron was forced into appointing this kind of technocrat, Barnier, who is the current prime minister. And that's been the case now for about really only a few months.
3 months.
Yeah, 3 months, leading to this situation where they pass the budget through the kind of these extraordinary measures the French Constitution has, where you can pass budgets without actually having a vote on it. The key was that Le Pen had been kind of on the government's side with this budget, while the left was uproarious because this budget, keeps the early retirement age at the elevated level that Macron had placed it, whereas the left wants to lower it again to age 62. But Le Pen switched, and I think that she could weaken Macron. She joined with the left, and so these two parties now are going to call for the no confidence in the prime minister, collapsing the government. A very, unusual move. Right before the reopening of Notre Dame, in the midst of economic uncertainty in the Eurozone, where the European economies have just been underperforming greatly. And then, of course, amidst the background of the Ukraine war, where the West seems to be uncertain and in disarray, while Russia continues to press forward at great cost to itself, but still slowly advancing.
I should make I want to make a quick correction. The person who was the subject of the scene that I saw on Nightline was not Pat Schroeder, but rather former American diplomat Pat Darien, who was actually a very incendiary figure in the Carter administration as a human rights envoy, who seemed to only find human rights problems in countries that she deemed right wing, and was a kind of clownish figure. Doesn't mean that she should have been manhandled on a jetway by South Korean goons, and that point still stands. I think the point is that these parties of the left and the right in France are tanking the premiership and leaving Macron with almost no options. That's why I say it's a constitutional crisis of a kind, because the way the French Constitution is written, he can't call another election for another year. So how on earth he is going to find a prime minister who can pass muster is very unclear, and therefore the government will be in some extraordinary caretaker moment in which it can make no policy. So getting back to the larger point, a country works just fine. The United States of America is working just fine. You know where else isn't working so well? Britain. You know how I know that? So Keir Starmer, Prime Minister of Britain, won the most lopsided election in British history, got 419 seats in the last election. Though not a huge plurality of actual voters. I think he got 36% or something, but they were distributed perfectly for him to get 419 seats and to reduce the Conservative Party to ashes, except now he's polling at like 25%. This is a danger to us. And by us, I don't just mean America, but I mean a world Jewry. Because as Stephen Pollard wrote in commentary in a couple of months ago, where the Labour Party's base now exists is within the Muslim communities in Britain. And as the party's hold on the voters who went from Tory to Labour weakens, he will have to stand on his platform, and that platform is Muslim. And the increasingly outrageous, dangerous, horrifying behavior that this community is displaying toward Britain's 450,000 Jews is really nothing short of terrifying, and is designed really to create a mass migration. I don't know how else to look at it. They are trying to convince British Jews to leave Britain.
And the same in Amsterdam as well. But, I will say the connecting thread between the France story and what you just outlined in the United Kingdom is national populism, right? I mean, why did the Tories do so bad? Well, it's because Nigel Farage and Reform broke apart. So splitting the Conservative vote in the UK and allowing Labour to rack up this big parliamentary majority, even though its actual vote total was not that extraordinary. And here again in France, right, the fact of national populism creating fissures in the French right, where the old Conservative Party is basically nothing now, creating the phenomenon of Macron. But Macron is in, it seems to me, this rear guard defensive action continually to prevent Marine Le Pen and Jordan Bardella, her younger kind of protege, but sometimes they have falling outs from taking power. What's the difference between us and them? Well, it seems that the United States is much better in integrating these populist movements into our two-party duopoly because of our first-past-the-post system, because of the Electoral College, because of the structure of the Constitution, than these other parliamentary proportional representation democracies. I think this is a point where we should be happy about our Constitution and happy about the Electoral College and the two-party system, because what happens? Well, we have national populism arise in the United States after the financial crisis and the Bush presidency, and not seamlessly, but it becomes integrated within the Republican Party. And on the extreme left, rather than AOC and Bernie Sanders being able to form their own party and cause all these shenanigans, they have to be incorporated more or less within the Democrats. So it's actually another testament to the stability of American democracy. Now, having just gone through another peaceful, regular election and awaiting the incoming past president to return.
Abe, people said throughout the election, everybody said, it's like this is what you get. This is 330 million people. These are the two people, or as it turned out, three people that you were going to get to choose from. Like
also a minor constitutional crisis.
Fair
But,
enough.
yeah.
Okay, but we got through that too.
Yeah.
Because the voters said,
Sure did.
Oh, sorry. But we're living through one now, you could say, given the fact that we have a non-compos mentis president, Jill Biden sitting at the Resolute desk and Kamala Harris at the bottom of a Mai Tai in Hawaii. But it turns out that, so these are the choices you get, and we're going to get through it. Like, we're going to get through it. Trump will be president. Some people will be happy. Some people will be really unhappy. Doubtless, as Matt said the other day, if the Democrats take the House in 2026, or even before, given that there's like a 2-seat House majority, they're going to impeach Trump somehow, some way. That'll happen. And then in 2028, there'll be another election. And you know what'll happen? There'll be another president.
Well,
We'll go on. And then AOC, as Matt says, AOC isn't obliged to form a new party. She'll run for president of the party.
I'm thinking about Matt's point because I think it's so brilliant and it's deep. But there's trade-offs for everything. So yes, in some sense, excuse me, we can avoid the kind of crises that other parliamentary systems have, but the fact that our system absorbs populists and extremists of various sorts, it's also kind of a poison pill because it mainstreams them to some degree, right? It can change the face and the shape of moderate politics, of what was moderate politics.
But
that's what happened in. Sorry, that's what happened in Britain with Corbyn, right? The party with the Corbynites, Labour had tried to assuage their revolt against the establishment by bringing them into the tent and trying to give them some position within the party and, really sort of merging them with the mainstream. And then, of course, Corbyn became the leader of the party and we saw what happened. So there is a concern, yes, that you can hug the radicals too closely and they end up at the podium.
Well, so if you look at America as a colossal marketing experiment, and these parties as the two major marketing tools for American politics, what's important is you say, okay, we're going to try to bring these people in, and then they're going to be essentially seduced and corrupted by their proximity to power and money and mainstreamism. That's sort of the idea behind bringing in the counterculture into the capitalist mainstream, right? It's like, you know what? All this horrible rock music we hate so much. You know what? Maybe we can make a lot of money selling it. And then, within 30 years, all of these people who wanted to blow, you're going to play Fight the Power. You're going to be Public Enemy. That's going to be on a car commercial. F the police is going to be on a car commercial.
But in politics, something else sometimes happens in that attempt to corrupt the you could either say revolutionary idealists or whatever you want to call them, zealots on either side. And that's that they then push the party much further toward, they bring the party towards them a few steps each time. And I think what that means for a healthy two-party system is that you do sometimes need moderate leadership that can form these coalitions in an election and put someone up. Joe Biden was this person, not the first time around, and squelch that extremist. Now the Democratic Party, though, is having this real soul-searching moment about the culture war issues. And that's the second part. I think a lot of that, in terms of the health of our two-party system compared to a parliamentary system, worked in part because a lot of our disagreements in a more religious, less secular age were solved outside of politics. But in an increasingly secular society, our culture wars are our politics. And that does sort of make it a little harder to come to any sort of resolution or agreement with people for whom we have serious disagreements. The trans issue for the Democrats being the one that's obviously front and center recently.
Well, we should move on to that because there is an oral argument today in the Supreme Court on this bill in Tennessee, or this law in Tennessee, that restricts the use of, I don't even want to call it gender affirming care because I consider it gender destroying evil. So I don't even know what term to use. Trans propagandistic care, something like that, that the Tennessee
Trans procedures.
Well,
procedures.
it's the sterilization and hormone treatment of children.
Children.
Sterilizing
Okay.
and
Yes.
treating with hormones children.
Yes.
That's what it is.
So the case has been brought before the Supreme Court. The claim that is being made by the pro-trans side is that every treatment that is used in this kind of care is treatment that has been authorized for use by, I guess, the FDA. So you use a puberty blocker. Puberty blockers have been authorized for treatment by the, use testosterone treatments. They have been authorized. And I guess in the most extreme case, the right to dismember yourself has been approved as a legal procedure by the FDA or whoever approves such procedures. You know, the eugenics and monster panel of ethics of the Monsters of American Medical Ethics panel. And so therefore, if they've been approved, they've been approved.
Right. And well, they've been approved for use by biological sex. So for example, if you are a biological male who, if you're a male and you experience puberty early, doctors have prescribed puberty blockers in order to deal with this developmental issue. What the
and women to girls too, who often, if they have very early onset menses, for example, which can happen as early as 8.
Testosterone boost, right? If you're a male, then doctors are able to prescribe it for you. What the ACLU and the government of the United States of America is arguing before the Supreme Court today is that those treatments therefore should be available to women in order to change their gender, even though traditionally they have been prescribed to, and conversely available to men to change their gender, even though they've been traditionally prescribed for the sex, to treat conditions regarding sex. And so the implicit assumption of the government's case and the ACLU's case is that there's no such thing as biological sex. And so therefore it violates equal protection in order to say, well, you can use this to treat a developmental issue stemming from your sex, but not in order to change your sex if you are a minor.
Right.
And so this is an equal protection claim. And it strikes me as a ludicrous one. But I do think there's a question about where the Supreme Court, in particular Justice Gorsuch, will go, because in the Bostock decision of 2020, Justice Gorsuch, as is his wont, opened up a big door when he said that the government must use gender identity as a protected class.
You could not be
really
fired for being, yes.
Yeah, you can't be fired for being transgender. Right.
And two things on this. One is that this case might be different because of issues of consent and ability to consent if you are underage, if you're a child, because the medical profession has rules to that effect in terms of whether a child can consent to treatments. And I mean, there are huge ethical issues here. But we should spend a minute thinking about the last couple of years of this administration and its incredibly radical approach to sex and gender and trans issues. Because there's another case in Texas, a state case, where the Department of a federal case, but in Texas, where Biden's Department of Justice is prosecuting a doctor, a young surgeon who blew the whistle on procedures being performed on children that had been banned in their hospital, a children's hospital, but were happening anyway. He blew the whistle. And he's being prosecuted for violating patient privacy. And this is a perfect example of what this Department of Justice under Biden, when it comes to trans issues, how it treats people who are on the other side of this issue. And there's been a gag order now placed on this guy. He's, going to be millions of dollars in debt trying to fight this case. All he did was point out that his hospital was breaking its own rules and procedures and harming children. And this Justice Department is going after him full steam ahead. So this is one of those areas where, while we hear about, the Democratic Party is, thinking through whether it was too radical on trans issues in the last election and should we moderate our tone, when it comes down to it, the court's being asked the same question voters had in their minds when they voted on this issue, which is, do you believe that biological sex is real? Or do you believe that you can change it? That is the fundamental question. And the court, which now has a justice that wouldn't answer the question of what is a woman during her confirmation hearings because she claimed she wasn't a biologist, this will be a very interesting case to watch.
There's another point that could be radically libertarian in a way that I think should terrify everybody, which is that the way we handle medications and trials for medications and the approval of medications is, and anybody who has a teenager knows this about various things, you are allowed to do X, Y, and Z above the age of 18. Under the age of 18, there are vast numbers of medications that are not approved for use because the research, and remember, most of these drugs go through research of an astounding, costly sort. Hundreds of millions of dollars to make sure that the drugs that are approved do not have toxic effects, unseen toxic effects on other parts once you treat this part or that part of the other part. But what they cannot really measure, because you can't do trials on children for obvious reasons, unless they're really terminal or something like that, they cannot explain what happens in terms of a child's development, because children grow and their bodies change and their hormone systems grow and alter them. And should you say that a drug that has been approved for use in an adult should be approved for use in children because it was approved for use in adults? And the claim here, of course, is that it was approved for use in children, but was approved for use in children in, as Matt said, a very specific way, which is to enhance or make easier or make more healing the process of that development from boy to man or girl to woman. But if you're saying, well, we said it was okay for them to be used for this, now they can be used for that.
Well, and
there's no limiting principle to that idea.
Well, and this is why Abigail Schreier's excellent book was titled Irreversible Damage, because we do know rates of regret about some of these both hormonal and surgical transitions. We do know that a lot of people want to go back to what their biological sex is. I refuse to say male or female assigned at birth. I refuse to use that sort of Orwellian language. But these children are being asked to consent to something for which they might later change their minds. And if they change their minds, there is nothing that can be done for them. They will be permanently harmed. And that's what the court must consider in their amicus briefs that outline that.
And we should say, too, and our viewers and listeners are probably already aware, but it's not just Tennessee who has a law like this. There are 25 states that have laws like this. And if the Supreme Court were to find by a 5-4 vote that there is a constant, parents have the constitutional right under the 14th Amendment to trans their children, that means that all 25 state statutes would be knocked down. This would be the equivalent of Roe v. Wade, except for trans. And why the court would want to get into this thicket after spending so much time reversing and correcting the judicial activism and judge-made law of the 1970s, it was beyond me. And so I'll be paying attention to the oral arguments today to see whether you have 5 justices, maybe even 6 justices. We don't know how Gorsuch will view this issue in light of the minor aspect, as Christine points out. But it just seems to me that to be an opportunity for judicial overreach in a radical cultural direction, which this current court was composed to be against, and especially considering the election result, where the culture clearly has decided that this trans issue has gone too far, and so that the most effective ad in the election was the Kamala is for they, them, Trump is for you ad. And then within hours of Nancy Mace and Marjorie Taylor Greene calling for women-only bathrooms in light of the first trans congressperson elected from Delaware, the Democrats backed down. So I think this is, once again, the radical cultural element in this country is looking to the courts to impose something that they cannot achieve through the legislative process. And it would be a huge, huge act of judicial overreach.
Well, not only
if the court were to side with the ACLU and the government here.
You know, I to some extent, I think the problem here, though, is that the horse is out of the barn, in that so-called gender-affirming care, medical intervention in gender-affirming care, is legal at all. As long as that stands, there's going to be these cases. There's going to be these reaches for more and more. That's the legal issue that
But this is
needs
what's
to
interesting
change.
about the constitutional question. And this is why, I have my weird conspiracy theory about why we should actually have the ERA passed if you're conservative, because it will force the court to define what a woman is, right? And the word woman doesn't appear in the Constitution. And many of these cases revolve around definitions, even the phrase gender affirming care. No, sex is a biological reality. Gender is a cultural construct. And the court is being asked to mesh and merge those in the way that, as Abe says, a lot of our culture has already sort of come to terms with, but not with children. That, I think, is what is so crucial about this case, and also about the whistleblower case in Texas. But they have to, in some ways, they're going to be asked to define biological sex, right? What is biological sex? Because there are 2 arguments about it before the court.
Chase Strangio, who is the lawyer who is going to argue the case on behalf of the ACLU in the Supreme Court, a transgender person, and I can't remember in which direction. So
Trans man.
Female to male.
Again, I don't care. I really don't care. Female to male, maybe go the other way in 5 years. People convert, like they convert to Islam and then they convert to Christianity. I don't know. Anyway, has argued on television that a child as young as 2 knows that that child was born in the wrong body. This is a psychotic opinion. A boy who says he wants to wear the Moana dress is not saying that he wants to be a girl. A girl who likes pants is not saying she wants to be a boy. This is not a construct in their heads. Now, I don't believe this is a construct in anybody's head at any time. It is a matter of choice or theory. It goes against every theory that we were instructed to believe over the last 40 years about homosexuality, which is to say that these are things that are true at birth, they're born this way. It's not a matter of choice.
Well, see, and that's actually, that's actually what this reminds me of, which is that it's very easy to see the echoes of conversion therapy and the conversion therapy debate in this, except reversed, right? Young people say, a boy likes putting a bow in his hair or whatever, and it immediately the option is to convert them to a new gender, to convert them physically to match the gender identity that you think is in their head. But the reason the the discussion on homosexuality brought this up is because it sort of erases homosexuality in a weird way. And we've heard gay authors, Andrew Sullivan and others, talk about this, which is that there's no longer you're gay. It's you were born in the wrong body, and we have to surgically alter you. So it's like, there's no such thing as a woman. There's no such thing as being gay. There's only gender. And that sort of thing has changed from, don't force children, don't convince them that there's something wrong with them, to incentivize treating children like there's something wrong with them.
Those of us who have children, 4 of us here have children. A 3-year-old tells you that they're an elephant. They're not an elephant. I mean, this is a reductio ad absurdum, but it actually isn't. Children live in a world that is half fantasy and half real. It's part of how they make sense out of the world. It's part of how they learn dividing lines between the real and the dream, and what is actual and what is not. And we are now in the business of legislating that a literally infantile state of consciousness that says that, not just infantile, I mean, there are religions that delve into this. Obviously, Hinduism does to some degree. The idea that you are a soul detached from a body, and that your soul can, in the course of eternity, migrate into any form. So I shouldn't belittle it that much, but this is a very real thing that we are about to people want to enshrine into law, is an understanding of human nature as mutable that has consequences we cannot even begin to start imagining 2 generations hence.
Well, it also, there's a really deep irony to the movement itself, which I think Seth is correctly pointing to, and that's that it actually narrows the range of choices. So instead of broadening people's ability to live, I'm talking only about adults here, because children should, I agree with John, children should not be subjected to this. But in terms of how you want to live your life, the range in terms of the gender spectrum is narrowing precipitously, because the trans activists are insisting it does. Look what they did to the LGBTQ flag. They literally put a big old arrow through it. And it prevents, look, I'm a very proud member of the former Tomboy Club. If I was growing up now with my tomboy tendencies, the short hair and the crazy skateboarding and all the stuff I love to do, and I was in a certain socioeconomic environment where that was a popular thing, they would say I was a boy. I see this with some of my children's friends, given the sort of cultural and political leanings of the parents, and many of our institutions are supporting this. Schools are supporting this. There's the cultural industry is supporting this in a way that makes it very difficult to argue against, and it does require brave people like this Texas doctor who's a whistleblower, and conservatives standing up and saying no. No, sex is real. Biological sex is real. And people who do that, like Carol Hooven at Harvard, get ostracized from their profession for saying it, but it has to be said. It must be said.
And maybe,
by the way, Carol Markowitz, our friend Carol Markowitz, likes to say, men still get to be men.
Yeah, it's deeply misogynistic.
It's always, yes. This whole thing is about women and how vaguely defined a woman is, but it ends up being a kind of misogynistic thing, as you say, because as Carol likes to say, everybody still lets men be men. It's just women who get changed who get filed around into different categories.
Radical lesbians were the canaries in the coal mine of this movement. They identified early on the deep strain of misogyny in the extreme trans activist movement, and they tried to warn everyone.
Fair enough. Okay, I guess I'm going to now lighten the mood. Although, should we spend 3 minutes on Pete Hegseth? Pete Hegseth as Secretary of Defense nominee.
That's not going to lighten our mood, but
It's going to lighten my mood a
He
little.
says that he's fighting for it, John. It just came over the wires here.
Uh-huh.
He said that he talked to Trump this morning. Trump told him to keep fighting. And so he had the interview with Fox and Friends with his mother. And he may have another interview today. But Pete Hegseth says that he's going to continue fighting to be confirmed as Secretary of Defense, despite the bad media that is dogging him for the past week.
Okay, so that means he'll be gone by Friday. Let me just say this. One of the hits on him is disgusting, and I'm glad he went on TV with his mother. The New York Times piece surfacing an enraged email from his mother about the divorce that he was going through 6 or 7 years ago and saying, "You're bad toward women and I'm ashamed of you." Publishing that was an act of infamy. It was disgusting. It's what happens when editors stop working and people stop understanding what is and what is not appropriate. Internal family expressions of pain are not for public consumption. And if that were the reason that he were going to go down, I think that would be very sad. I don't think that's why he'll go down. I think he'll go down because the Senate will make it clear to Trump by Friday that he's not confirmable. We already have names being floated. We've got Ron DeSantis, of course, a decorated veteran, being floated. Don't know why he wanted to do it. Actually, I don't know why he wanted to leave his governorship 2 years early. There are other people, Mac Haggerty, Mike
Elbridge
Walsh.
Colby.
Joni Ernst has even been.
Well, let's Joni Ernst, right?
Joni Ernst is one of the people who would decide Hegseth's fate, and seems to have indicated her. I'm willing to step in in his place.
Right. The idea that Bridge Colby, who has no business publishing anything longer than a 1,000-word op-ed of uncommon stupidity, would be actually a Secretary of Defense candidate, would be a little like making me a candidate for the Archbishop of Canterbury, in my view. But okay, he can have his moment there from the Quincy Institute of selling out the United States. Congratulations to all who love Bridge Colby, the man who says that we need to husband all of our resources for the coming fight with China against Taiwan. And then when asked if we should defend Taiwan if China invades Taiwan, says no. So that should give you an idea of his brilliance and depth of sophistication in his discussions of foreign policy.
Sounds to me like you're making the argument for Pete Hegseth to be Secretary of Defense.
Look, I already said, from what I can tell, he would be fine with me, even though I'm sure there are 1,000 people who would be better at it. Trump can pick him if he wants him. The Senate really may not want him because of his.
He's
I
had
just thought that even subdued, terrible cold bronchial John has that vim and vigor of like on going after Colby.
Well, you mentioned Bridge Colby to me, and I just can't help myself. I'm sorry.
You don't need
Hegseth
Robitussin, you need isolationism.
Yeah.
Hegseth has some supporters. The conservative wing of the Republicans in the Senate have come out and said that they are for him. But the real issue is there are a lot of senators there in kind of the middle of the conference who have not come out. And Senator Lindsey Graham of South Carolina said that he was deeply troubled by some of the reporting about Hegseth's past. And, for Graham to say that, I think should ring alarm bells in the Hegseth camp, because Graham, of course, is always concerned about getting right with Trump.
Right.
And so
that's why. That's
I don't
why
think he would say that without having had some conversation with Trump.
I think
when I saw Graham said that yesterday, that's when I said this nomination.
But Hegseth,
all but dead.
Hegseth's got problems. By the way, I'm fine with him too. But Hegseth's got problems I think, of a less scandalous nature too. I know he says he's fighting, but I saw footage of him yesterday making his rounds on Capitol Hill. He didn't look like he was fighting very competently. When he was asked about women in combat roles, he completely dodged the question because he has said in the past he doesn't believe they belong in combat roles. And he was asked about it, and he says, we have many wonderful women serving in the U.S. Armed Forces, and we're very proud of them. Do you believe that they should serve in combat? Walked right on. If you get called for one of these positions, you have to either stand by what you think, or renounce it totally, or do something. But you can't
and that will come
Kamala
up
it.
if we get to a hearing. That will certainly be one question.
Yeah.
That will come up, including questions about his past too. And I think one reason why the nomination could be in jeopardy is it's not the initial police report and the non-disclosure agreement that Hegseth made with the woman in California in 2017 was not disclosed to the transition team. And so you would kind of feel, I think, betrayed if you're part of the Trump transition to go through with this nomination, say to the president, okay, let's do this. And then all of a sudden this drops, right, from interested parties and from the media that's hostile to Trump. But nonetheless, it's causing him problems. And I think that was kind of the issue here, is that he not only will have to address some of these policy questions like women in combat, but if he gets to a hearing, he's going to have to deal with a lot of critical comments and stories about his past that so far mainly have been anonymous, some not anonymous, but the senators are going to raise it nonetheless.
Can I make one more point here about this, which is that if you look at the range of names, including Hegseth's, and now the names that are being floated as a possible replacement, and the range of types and ideologies and approaches we're talking about here, it's another indication that Trump doesn't care at all about ideology in this position, or a number of them. Just doesn't care.
Well, we don't know who's floating the names. So,
well, DeSantis, I think, would be in line with what Trump has been looking for, because, of course, DeSantis hates woke. And DeSantis was also critical of Ukraine support during the primary. So, and he's from Florida, so he checks a lot of boxes that are important.
And he breaks plates.
Trump has lost two Florida men so far.
No one would question DeSantis's qualifications at all. I mean,
no, not at all.
And two-term governor of Florida, he can definitely take on the Pentagon.
Yeah, and he does face down his opponents and is incredibly tough. So, if you actually want someone to go in and go into the trenches in the Pentagon to change things up, he would be a great pick. I don't entirely understand what it would do for him, and that transition from being an executive with his own independent authority to being somebody inside a larger executive organization. That is a tough transition. Like, I remember Mel Martinez, the governor of Florida, who became the drug czar. After I left the drug czar's office, one of the two jobs I had in government, and he became the drug czar after Bill Bennett was drug czar. And he was traveling around with somebody, I think our friend John Walters, who now runs the Hudson Institute. And John said, well, how do you like being drug czar? And Martinez said, I hate this. I hate this job. It's horrible. Like when you're governor and like somebody says there's a pothole, on a street in Tampa, you call somebody in the street department in Tampa and say, fix that pothole. And here I have 56 different agencies I'm supposedly overseeing, and nobody will do anything I ask them. This is awful. That's actually what it's like to go from being an executive with independent authority to being, admittedly a very powerful person in a very powerful organization.
But he's term limited, and obviously Florida loves him, and he has, I assume, still higher national level ambitions. And you could see him understanding this as a stepping stone to 2028.
Okay. Anyway, he's the most. That's the most interesting thing that happened was the DeSantis name float. I think because everybody else, I think we already had on our radar screen, and he was not on the radar screen. So the fun Trump transition, which is the whoa, that came out of nowhere. That he adds that. We haven't had one of those in the, I guess we haven't had one of those since Kash Patel. That was only 5 days ago or something, 6 days ago, and I'm already yearning for more. I want more. I want more shocks. I want more fathers-in-law getting jobs. That's
more Florida.
More Florida, more Machatzon.
Rubio was the first one that made us go, "Oh wow, this is going to be interesting."
Yeah, and he lost that Florida DEA guy.
Yep. And Gates.
Gates, so we need another Florida person.
That's right.
It's very important. All right, so recommendation from me on Max. I think it's on Netflix. Yacht Rock, a documentary with a K, made by Ringer Films, which is Bill Simmons' company, and it is the story of Yacht Rock, which defining what Yacht Rock is one of the things that the documentary spends 90 minutes attempting to do. The entire term, it turns out, comes from a series of internet sketches by a comedy troupe that had named it and made comic videos in which different people in the world of this kind of smooth rock of the 1970s would fight, wearing wigs, looking like Michael McDonald or looking like Steely Dan or whatever. Immense amounts of time in this documentary are taken up with the question of whether or not Steely Dan qualifies as yacht rock. The idea being that some Steely Dan doesn't, but Aja, the album that made Steely Dan's reputation, is considered by many people to be the most perfectly recorded album ever, is the source of all yacht rock. The director gets Donald Fagen on the phone, one of the two guys in Steely Dan, at the end of the documentary, and says, "Hey, can I talk to you about yacht rock and your place in yacht rock?" And Donald Fagen pauses and says, "F you," and hangs up the phone because he thinks that yacht rock is an insulting term. But basically, the hero of the documentary is Michael McDonald, the lead singer, guy who became the lead singer of the Doobie Brothers. And it's just about how these fabulous, fantastic studio musicians in LA in the 1970s who could play anything and who knew jazz and who knew rock and who knew blues and who were able to synthesize all of this together on a series of different albums before forming their own groups and invented this sound that 40 years on is just, or 50 years on, is just extraordinarily pleasing.
Do they spend time on Christopher Cross? That's
of course
thing I care about. Thank you. Okay,
of
then I
course.
will watch it.
Christopher Cross explains that he wrote Sailing
literally
while he was on an acid trip. Ride Like the Wind. He wrote Ride Like the Wind while he was on an acid trip driving.
Totally the soundtrack of my childhood.
Dallas.
It's the soundtrack of my life now.
I'm going to do something.
XM Radio.
I'm going to do something very uncharacteristic and tell a personal story that I have to because you're the fact that they called Donald Fagen and asked him if Steely Dan was yacht rock reminds me of this. Over 20 years ago, I was having a conversation with a friend, and for some reason, Chuck Mangione came up. Do we remember Chuck Mangione?
Oh, yeah. I have a story about him, too, but I don't know if we can get to it.
Feels So Good.
Yes.
Okay, right? Okay. So my friend was...
Not just the personal story, but the music to go along with it.
You got it. So my friend said, just described him sort of in passing as a jazz musician. And I said, I don't think he's a jazz musician. There's no way he's a jazz musician. I mean, that was like played in discos. It's like a yacht disco, if you will. Okay. And this debate went on and on and on and on. And then somehow my friend obtained Chuck Mangione's phone number. And I called him and I said, do you think that Feels So Good is disco? And I didn't get quite the Donald Fagen treatment, but something close to it. That's my story.
I have a quick
That
joke.
is an awesome story. I'm sorry. You just cold called Mangione. I love it.
Okay, I will tell my quick Chuck Mangione, and then we'll go. For a time in the 90s, I'm embarrassed to say, and proud, and I'm humble bragging to say that I spent some time at Elaine's, the famous, legendary New York watering hole. Elaine liked me because I worked at the New York Post, and she knew who I was. And my dad had actually been one of the founding drinkers at Elaine's in the 60s. And so I was kind of grandfathered in, and she enjoyed my company. And one of the ways she showed you enjoyed your company was you came in, got a table. Elaine would come sit at your table and hang out with you. One day, Elaine, who is a very large woman with a very gravelly voice, is sitting there and complaining about somebody like Pete Hamill, whom most people don't know. And then she looks over and she goes, "Oh no, oh my God, oh no, 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 no." And Chuck Mangione had come in and sat down. She was like, "Oh God, I know he's going to do it. He's going to do it, and there's nothing I can do." And I said, "What is he going to do?" She said, "He's going to play." And I said, "Is that bad?" And she's like, every time he does this. And so he's literally saying 5 minutes later, Chuck Mangione stands up and he takes out his instrument from a case in the middle of this crowded restaurant, and he plays Feels So Good for like 5 minutes. Everything stops. All conversations have to stop while everybody has to listen to Chuck Mangione playing Feels So Good. He's done. There's a smattering of polite applause. He sits down and she says, "I gotta ban him. I gotta ban him. This is no good." So that's my Chuck Mangione story. That's far afield we have gotten from Yacht Rocket documentary, an absolutely delightful piece of work on Netflix. So that is my recommendation. And we will be back with you tomorrow. So for Matt, Seth, Christine, and Abe, I'm John Podhoretz. Keep the candle burning.